Okay, greetings and welcome to the Gaddy's Pan-African Community News Update. Today's date is the 1st of February 2026. I'm Brother Dr. Toyin Agbetu in the studio with Sister Oleander.
Hey, everybody.
We're here really for another review of some of the community-related news over the last 2 weeks. It's good not to be flying solo today, but we do have a really jam-packed show. I think they're always jam-packed, but this one in particular, I think is probably one of the longest we've done in a while. So, as usual, it'll be wonderful if you can interact with us by tweeting or not tweeting, using chat, using the likes or the subscribes and all those kind of things. We should be live through on Facebook and YouTube. We're not using Twitter this particular week. And as ever, if you like what we're doing, please share it with others, let them know we're on. Feel free to subscribe and all that sort of stuff. But Sister Oleander will be monitoring the chat. So we're going to keep going on. Let me just try and change the screen here because I'm still learning. And let's move on to our first section. And that is We Remember. And this is when we start with libations to those that have recently passed or any notable anniversaries. Now, the first libation is to one that came really as a shock to everyone. I say a shock, probably like a stab in the heart almost. And that's to who many of us call Uncle Eric, but the beloved elder, Eric Huntley. Now, he was a publisher and a political activist. He's joined the ancestors. He was the co-founder with his wife, Jessica, who you can see in the image, of the radical publishing house Bogler Overture, which was set up in London in 1968 to showcase African writing talent. I think the first publication, well, no, I can't remember the first publication, so I'm not going to take a guess there, but it was a groundbreaking a publishing house. It was established in their house in many ways. It was also served as a community hub and informal advice center, as well as a place to buy books from outside the mainstream. Now, among many of the authors that were championed by the local Overture were Linton Kwesi Johnson, Valerie Bloom, Lem Sase, Beryl Gilroy, Donald Hines. They were also, both of them, involved in creating the International Book Fair of Radical and Third World Books, which ran from 1982 to 1995. And this was uniting and amplifying the force of African intellectuals, creatives, and activists all across the world. So this was a really global initiative that started here in the UK with our elder and his wife. Now, Uncle Huntley, or Eric Huntley, was for many years involved in justice campaigns based in the UK. He was a key figure in the Caribbean Education and Community Workers Association and also the Black Parents Movement. And this was first formed in response to the racist labeling of a large number of children of African heritage as educationally subnormal. He also campaigned against the SUS laws, and many of you remember that. That was the police campaign which harassed African people, young and old, on the streets without any grounds for suspicion through some racist, violent, and many times stop and search campaigns. And this probably accumulated in his involvement in what was later known as the Black People's Day of Action in 1981, which followed the dire police response to what's widely believed to be a racist arson attack, the New Cross Fire massacre in southeast London. And we spoke about that last week. Now, one of the things that many of us don't know is that both Eric and Jessica Huntley helped to form the People's Progressive Party in Guyana, which in the 1950s was kind of a revolutionary movement before coming to settle in the UK after Eric was imprisoned. They set up Bogler Overture books to dispute the work of the amazing scholar, so I say scholars, but scholar activist, Walter Rodney. It's an amazing, and when we hear that phrase that when an elder passes away, we lose a library. This is really one of those situations there. I know that the archives, there's a friend of the Huntley archives, I can't remember the exact acronym, FHLMA, so it's based at the London Metropolitan Archives. I think they're doing an event to commemorate his passing and their legacy of the work this year. So yeah, if you want to find out more, please check him out. Sorry, just the next libation is to the reggae drumming legend Sly Dunbar, or Lowell Fillmore Dunbar, as his full name was, and he joined the Ancestors aged 73. Now, Sly was one of the most renowned Jamaican drummers, respected internationally for his precision timing, for the inventiveness of his approach to using the drums, and together with his bass playing partner, Robbie Shakespeare, backed nearly every reggae artist of note and collaborated with an array of admirers. And this included artists like Bob Dylan, Rolling Stones, Ian Dury, Joan Armatrading, even Madonna, the Fugees, Sinead O'Connor. Though what many of us tend to remember is his outstanding hits that brought Grace Jones to stardom. And I think, you know, when we think about that, we're talking about Pull Up to the Bumper. But he was an astounding talent, and Sly and Robbie, you know, kind of like combo, didn't just grace those pop artists and those who we know in that realm, but also stayed true to their roots and supported many grassroots talent, pushing reggae, internationalizing it into the cultural force that it is today. We remember. The next libation goes to the renowned woodcarver, Kasali Agambe Ogun, and he joined the Ancestors after a brief illness. He came from a long tradition of woodcarvers from the Yoruba people and took the tradition from his birthplace of Osogbo in the country's southwest to the global art space. Now, he was one of the leading lights in the new sacred art movement founded by the late Australian Nigerian artist and Yoruba priestess Suzanne Wenger in the 1960s. And this was done to help protect the 75-hectare Oshun forest and its river. He joined the Ancestors, and it's always, you know, it's always a tragedy when we lose artists who are really firming up our spiritual kind of like beliefs in artistry, just like Sly and Robbie before. The next libation is to our elder, Dr. Gladys West. Now, she was a pioneering mathematician whose work laid the foundation for what we now know as the modern GPS technology. Now, she's joined at the age of 95. She was born into poverty on a Virginia farm during the Jim Crow era. She grew up in segregated South, where opportunity was very scarce, and through determination and an extraordinary academic talent, she graduated first in a high school class and earned a scholarship to Virginia State College. It's now Virginia State University. Now, our elder, in 1956, began working as a mathematician at a Naval Surface or Warfare Center in Virginia. She was one of the only African-American women hired. I think she was only two, I should say. She was one of two hired at the base, and one of just 4 African-American employees at the time across the whole sector. So what followed then was a career that would quietly change the world. She devoted herself to solving one of science's most complex challenges, which is accurately modeling the shape of the Earth. And her painstaking calculations and her programming helped transform raw satellite data into precise geodetic or geographic models, enabling reliable satellite-based navigation. And that's the system that ultimately became the backbone of what we call GPS, Global Positioning System. And that's essential to aviation, shipping, emergency responses, and of course our smartphones and devices in our daily life worldwide. We remember. And the final libation for this week is to Stephen Cat Moore, and there's been tributes. There've been tributes pouring in from all over the world, especially Jamaica and the global music community following his passing. He was a legendary musician. He joined the Ancestors a couple of weeks ago on Sunday at the age of 69. Now, Cat Core was a founding member and musical director of the iconic reggae band Third World, and is widely regarded as one of the architects of Jamaica's modern musical legacy. With Third World, he delivered classic hits, including Reggae Ambassador, Now that we found love at 96 degrees in the shade and tried your love. The Minister of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport, Olivia Grange, described him as a unique talent who could truly be described as the reggae ambassador, calling his passing a tremendous loss. And yeah, that is amazing talent again. We remember. Okay, thank you. You are watching Legality's Pan-African Community News Update. Just remember, if you are watching live, please feel free just to drop us a line to know that you can hear us, you can see us okay. I'm going to keep going on. The recordings are, the program is recorded, so you can watch it kind of like afterwards as well. And Sister Oleander is on the line as well. So if you have a comment or something you want to make, she can check it out, read it, pass it through, etc. But I'm going to continue because it is quite a lot. It's quite a long list of programs that we have today, or articles that we got to go through. So now I'm going to go over the next section, which is domestic news. And this is, again, stories affecting our community from over the past 2 weeks. Okay, and I'm going to start off with a story that you might have heard quite a lot about on social media. And this is one about the same-day emergency care pilot called SDEC, which offered rapid access to specialist care for people living with sickle cell, closing down on the 30th of January. And this has happened, this has taken place. Now, what's happened is that many patients are fearing the closure going to leave them with no choice but to attend general A&E departments if they have a crisis. Now, I should make it clear, this is only the SDEC unit or the pilot that was running in the Royal London. Now, as a result of kind of like this story coming out, and we've had many community organisations kind of like making clear that we are aware of these issues, there's been a petition and it's attracted 40,000 signatures so far. It was launched by a sickle cell patient, Della Bay, who at 48 fears that closure could put lives at risk. Now, it's important to know that the Royal London unit is not the only specialist service under threat. Nationally, there are only just 7 such services similar to it. But it is important to understand that it doesn't mean that the day units that exist in those hospitals is shutting down. They are still running. It's a NHS England has been running a 2-year pilot emergency department bypass running under. But sadly, as you've learned, this pilot has come to an end. Just for those of you who are unaware, but if you're watching the program, you probably are aware, sickle cell affects people of African heritage. In the UK, there's between 15,000 to 17,000 people who are afflicted with it and who live with it. And it's one of the fastest growing genetic disorders. Interesting. Ourselves, myself, Sister Oleander, were recently there for the last week. And yeah, if there's any questions, we're more than welcome to help. Sister Oleander.
Yeah, I just wanted to just make sure that we're completely clear on this closure. Yes, this closure as it currently stands has happened at the Royal London Hospital. However, we are hopeful with all the pressure that we're putting on, but also the goodwill of most of the haematology department, that it will reopen. It will be bigger and better. And hopefully we're looking at later this year, maybe towards September or something, because they will have to start from scratch in terms of finding space in the hospital, but also recruiting new staff members that were manning it or personing it. So yeah, it's not a permanent closure. It is a closure for some months because it was a pilot. And so they are currently now in the stages of evaluating how it went. I mean, it's been phenomenal in terms of the positivity of how people received the whole unit and how people used the whole unit. The stats are showing very positive, so there's no reason why it won't reopen. So yeah, so we are hopeful that it will reopen later this year, bigger and better.
Thank you for sharing that, Sister Oleander. And yeah, again, just to make sure, it's like, this is a scheme, and we are looking forward and hoping for it coming back. I think it's one of those financial decisions as well that impacts these kind of things, but it doesn't mean that there aren't the regular services that the hospital provide for patients with sickle cell isn't going to be shut down. They are still going to be there, but this was another pipeline which helped in many ways to bypass having to go to A&E to deal with kind of like a crisis. But we'll move on. Thank you, Sister Oleander. The next story is one of where over 200 school children have gathered to honour the victims of the New Cross fire this week. Now, as we mentioned last week, this year marks the 45th anniversary of the catastrophic fire, which took place in January 1981. It sadly claimed the lives of 13 young people during a birthday party, and as we mentioned, another took his life 2 years later. Now, the Phoenix Federation, which includes Grinlin Gibbons Primary School, Oak Gardens Primary School, and Grinlin Gardens Alternative Provision, has continued to work with survivors and bereaved family. And on January the 19th, the Federation's annual commemoration ceremony became a strong collective tribute to this particular commitment. And in a powerful show of unity, 10 more Lewisham schools joined the remembrance, bringing together over 200 students in a shared act of learning, reflection, and respect. Now, the commemorative event started at 439 New Cross Road, the address where the fire took place. Children carried flags of the Caribbean as music by Bob Marley was being played. They contributed poems about justice, belonging, and social responsibility, and the names of those who lost their lives were read out and echoed by the audience. And we thank them for that act of remembrance and honour. Another story is that we've just seen data from a new report that shows that there are more than 25,000 professors in the UK, but out of that 25,000, only 250 of them are of African heritage. Now, in all but one university, African people are said to make up less than 20% of the staff, accounting for roughly 5% of staff at 2/3 of all other universities. So these figures are quite dire. And what's also something worth noting is that the majority of these staff are in non-academic roles. Now, this data was acquired through both the HESA database and a series of freedom of information requests sent to each university across London's university. And the University of East London was found to be the best employer of African staff, with African people making up 16% of all employees, with 41% of these staff in academic roles. So the University of East London is doing something right there. Now, many people are saying that this is very problematic, including Wayne Mitchell, who's Associate Provost for EDI at Imperial College London. He's asking, what kind of message is this sending out? Some would say it's a pipeline issue, that we haven't got enough people coming through. Some would say that there's not enough students taking the right A-levels in order for them to come through, especially to these prestigious institutions. But you also have to ask yourself, are people being given the opportunities to excel and to be promoted to get these positions? And I think it's a very important question. A colleague of mine, Matthew Smith, a history professor at University College London, also said that academia needs to move past the idea of what's labelled Black exceptionalism. And this is where you find that there are a few people in positions and, others saying that, well, you're just overstating the problem of race and racism, because if some of them are there, then clearly they're good enough and the rest aren't. This is a systemic problem. And if we want to address this disparity, we have to be actively making changes to the systems that are leading to this outcome. The next story is one about a nurse. I think we covered this initially, Jennifer Melly, who you can see on the screen, who was suspended over alleged breach of a transgender patient's confidentiality. Now, the good news is that she has actually been reinstated. Now, she is from a sister, Jennifer Miller. She's from Croydon, South London. She was removed from duty after speaking in public to the media about receiving a warning for using the wrong pronouns. The trust said it was concerned that confidential details about the patient's appearance, diagnosis, and treatment were shared with the media, but it found no evidence that the patient had been identified. Now, an internal disciplinary meeting at Epsom and St Heliers NHS Trust, where she worked, has now cleared her of further action. Now, this is, I don't know if you remember this, I think we did this maybe a month ago. This was a case that came back up following an incident in May 2024, where she was racially abused by a trans woman. And after that, she addressed them as Mr. And this is what led to the complaint against her, bearing in mind that she was racially abused. That's not in doubt by this trans woman. Now, the trust issued her with a written warning and separately warned the patient that racist and threatening behavior would not be tolerated. And that's to their credit. What wasn't perhaps to their credit is actually targeting our nurse for responding to being abused in such a hostile way. Now, an Epsom and St Heliers Hospitals spokesperson said they were pleased a member of staff who was previously suspended on full pay was being reinstated to clinical duties. And she herself has said that she felt deeply relieved and grateful at the decision following an incredible, long and painful journey. And many people understand the toll that racism has on us in British society. So just being accused of misgendering someone, even if that person has caused and been engaged in racist abuse, can actually put someone's career on hold and actually destroy it if the outcome had gone the wrong way. So yeah, we're happy for our sister. Justice, I don't even want to say justice has been done, because this shouldn't have happened to her in the first place. The next story is quite a devastating one. It is about a mother who has joined a campaign focusing on parent bereavement after the devastating loss of her sons. Now, this case, again in 2024, saw Shakira Dixon William, who was pregnant with twins, who she had named Isaiah and Micaiah. Just 19 weeks into her pregnancy, she went into labor, had a harrowing experience that started at home and continued while she was in Lewisham Hospital. Now, she said that she received some support from a bereavement midwife who helped with funeral arrangements and acted as a link between the hospital and the funeral home. However, she did feel that many aspects of care that she later learned were available to other parents were missing in her particular experience. So you have to understand, this is someone who's had a traumatic experience of losing her sons. And she has said that she wasn't given any information about what had happened. Other than her discharge notes, there was nothing specific about her loss. She later found out that other parents had received leaflets, handouts, keepsakes to help them through the experience, but she hadn't been even put into a bereavement room. It was only after searching for support online that Shakira came across SANS, which is a UK baby loss charity, and it's through SANS that she learned about other parents' experiences and realized that many aspects of care she hadn't received were actually available to others. And she said, that's the reason I decided to get involved in the campaign. This is a horrible, horrible situation to be in. And the fact she's giving back to help others so they don't go through that is admirable. She says, I want to improve the support and training for midwives and hospital staff so every bereaved parent gets the care they need, regardless of who they meet or when the loss happens. And thank you, Shakira, for doing that work. And we're sorry, of course, for your loss. 2024. Now, the headline says the incoming Archbishop of Canterbury, but I'm pretty sure she's the new Archbishop of Canterbury. I think I saw something on the news recently. This is the Right Reverend Dame Sarah Mullally. I don't normally use titles, but I'll allow it this once. She has been affirmed as the Church of, she's, I think, the Archbishop now, but she has reaffirmed the Church of England's £100 million reparations fund for British slavery, saying that to do so is grounded in Christian teaching. And this is despite pressure from 27 British MPs and peers to cancel the fund. Now, in the letter responding to the group, which is led by Conservative MP Katie Lamb, she wrote, but the church's historic involvement with African chattel enslavement must be met with care, clarity, and respect for the responsibilities entrusted to the church. And that's why they're using this £100 million to deal with the issue of reparations. She added, our calling to confront historic injustice and our commitment to sustaining parish life therefore both flow from the same gospel imperative to love our neighbour as ourselves and to enable all to flourish. Now, in a letter sent in December 2025, the MPs and peers opposing this plan said the church's endowment should be used instead for parish ministry, to maintain church buildings and care for the church's historic records. And they argued that redirecting £100 million away from these duties was wrong, describing the project as legally dubious and warning that it could set a worrying precedent. This is outrageous, but of course, this is the Conservative Party and peers, so it's not to be it's to be expected. But the Archbishop pushed back, stressed that the fund does not diminish the church's support of or investment in parish ministry or clergy. And she also noted that 1.6 billion is allocated to parishes over the next 3 years. That's 1.6 billion. So 100 million in the context of that amount is nothing. And the fact that there are complaints about them doing that, 100 million sounds like a great sum of money, but for African enslavement and church involvement, it should be much, much higher. But 100 million is a great start. Of course, if it had been £10, these MPs would have complained. Okay, next story. Again, this is something that we've covered. The Employment Appeal Tribunal has upheld a landmark appeal brought by 80 cleaners at Great Ormond Street Hospital, where the members of the United Voice of the World Union, who claimed indirect race discrimination after being kept on inferior pay and terms for 18 months following their transfer to NHS employment. So this is a great result. They've upheld it. The cleaners, who are all African, Asian and migrant workers, had previously been employed by the subcontractor OCS on lower pay and conditions than directly employed NHS staff. And in following a sustained campaign by United Voices of the World, the UVW, they were brought in-house in 2021, but their NHS pay and terms were delayed by over a year. And this year, the Employment Tribunal, Appeals Tribunal, ruled that this delay was unreasonable, unlawful, and indirectly discriminatory under the Equalities Act. And the ruling actually means now that the workers are entitled to back pay for the difference between the pay and benefit they received and what they should have received under their NHS contracts. The union asserts that the total amount is potentially in the millions. Now, this landmark victory builds on a series of successful legal claims by UVW, including the Royal Parks case, where outsourced workers challenged discriminatory pay and conditions. And together, these cases form part of the UVW's nearly decade-long fight to end discriminatory practices of outsourcing, particularly in the public sector. So it's not just hospitals, it's also at universities like UCL, where predominantly African, Asian, and migrant workers have been systematically pushed into lower paid, insecure roles. So this is actually a great outcome. And they shouldn't have to do this in the first place. But of course, it's great to see the tribunal saying that, look, this is clearly discriminatory and you're also going to have to pay back. Of course, one of the things that we haven't got space to discuss is that a lot of those workers sometimes just leave the sector. So they have enough, they can't survive, and they had to go and find other employment. So yeah, this is a good news story. Another interesting story, which I'd call a good news story, but we had to keep our eye on it, is that Westminster Council has signed off on its strategy to become a borough sanctuary. This is the term that they use for refugees and asylum seekers. Now, the council has said its plan means that migrants who are placed or find themselves living in central London will more easily be able to access health support, safe homes, and have better opportunities for education. Now, the town hall has spent almost 3 years writing its strategy after committing to becoming a borough sanctuary in March 2023. So it has taken a while to get here, but they're finally here. And Councillor Jeff Barraclough told a Westminster cabinet meeting this week that in London and more widely at a time when fascism is on the rise around the world, it's important that people stand up to be counted. And today, Westminster stands up and is counted. It says that the council has its strategy, sets out, and its strategy sets out a compassionate, coordinated approach to help people who have been forced to flee their homes feel safe, supported, and able to rebuild their lives in Westminster. Now, if you want to know the kind of figures we're talking about, almost half of Westminster residents are from minority ethnic backgrounds, and over a quarter do not speak English as their main language. And this is according to the 2021 census. More than a third hold a non-UK passport. And in this report, the local authority said that as of 2024, Westminster has the highest rate of international migration in England, with more than 20,000 residents arriving over the past 2 years, making up 10% of the borough's population. So this initiative is actually a very good initiative, and it kind of like, it puts a spotlight on what we're seeing happening across the pond in Minnesota, Minneapolis, and the ICE, kind of like abuse of ICE by the federal government and federal agents. But we'll come to that topic a bit later on. Well done, Westminster. Okay. I always said I was going to hold my tongue on this one because this was, I remember when the new Windrush commissioner was appointed, and when he came out, he made some dodgy statements that didn't kind of like give us much confidence. Then he's been involved in a few issues where he seems to have helped. Now, some more information on this particular topic. The Home Office has finally released the Memorandum of Understanding, which is a document that sets out the powers and operating framework of the Windrush Commissioner. And one of the things that we found out following an interview with a community radio station was that it retains significant control over the office of the Commissioner, which is intended to scrutinize it. Now, this is a real big problem because although the Memorandum of Understanding repeatedly states that the Commissioner operates independently, if you read the document, the operational arrangements show a structure in which the Home Office maintains influence over key aspects of the role. The Commissioner cannot publish non-public information obtained from the department without first securing agreement. And this requirement applies to data documents, internal material that may be essential to assessing the performance of the Windrush compensation and status schemes. The Home Office also retains control over the Commissioner's budget. So funding is not delegated, meaning that the department decides the size of the Commissioner's annual allocation and must approve any overspend. Even things like recruitment of staff remains dependent on Home Office approval, including external hiring. These arrangements give the Home Office the ability to shape the Commissioner's capacity, staffing, and operational reach. And this is really important for a body that's supposed to be independent. There's also this particular, kind of like a strange caveat. Unusual might be a better word. Now, the Commissioner's annual review is actually conducted by a senior Home Office official. I'm not sure if that you understand the implications of that, because what that tends to kind of like suggest quite strongly is that the department under scrutiny is responsible for assessing the performance of the body responsible for scrutinizing it. And this is a clear conflict where the Home Office is essentially marking its own homework. So the Home Office is going to assess the independent body that's assessing it. That's completely dodgy, and I would argue corrupt. Now, access to legal advice is also routed through the Home Office. If the Commissioner requires legal guidance on matters connected to the department's work, for example, he must first seek advice from the Windrush unit inside the Home Office. So external legal advice may be sought, but only in cases of what's called significant disagreement. And even then, the cost must be approved through Home Office budget processes. So if somebody wants to challenge the government on the particular case and how they're behaving, the Commissioner's office has to get permission from the Home Office. And before they can even, kind of like employ someone to give them external legal advice. Now, this structure may limit the Commissioner's ability to obtain legal independent interpretation on contentious issues. And this is, quite telling, because for many of the Windrush survivors and families, and let's be clear, many of them are continuing to struggle to navigate the compensation and status schemes. The commissioner was presented as a trusted voice for victims and affected communities. He was supposed to provide oversight and ensure accountability. What we are now seeing with this is that that's not really the case. This is almost like a tokenistic role, because anything that is contentious, anything that could potentially require external scrutiny, like from a lawyer, even employing someone like a researcher to dig and find out to make sure everything's going okay, needs permission from the Home Office. This is a Labour government. So I'm going to leave that there. I want to big up Jam Radio for the interview that kind of like brought this to light. The next story is, I think we covered this like a few years back, 3 or 4 years. This is the story of a young man. He's been nicknamed Jimmy. That's partly his name. Folajimi Olabumi Adewale. He jumped into the Thames to save a woman, and in April 2021, and he's actually been awarded the King's Commendation for bravery. Now, he and another would-be rescuer, Joaquim Garcia, went into the river near London Bridge at around midnight. The woman and Garcia were saved by the Coast Guard and Marine Police, but unfortunately our brother Olabumi Adewale could not be found, and his body was recovered around 6 hours later. Now, there's been much, I think, I can't remember, they put a little mini plaque around there. He was also given a bravery award. But this is now an honour that's been bestowed upon him in the King's Commendation for bravery. The inquest where he died, the assistant coroner ruled his death accidental and praised his courage and determination. And the last story for this section is one of an inquest into the death of a woman who passed from sickle cell at Frimley Park Hospital in Surrey, and that inquest has just started. She joined the ancestors in August 2024, and that's following 4 days of what they call care at this particular hospital. Now, of course, it's an inquest, so I don't want to, kind of like prejudice the outcome. But during the inquest, her family raised concerns about how her condition was managed at Frimley Park. The inquest, which took place on the 27th of January, focused on medical care that she received in the days leading up to her passing. She was 47. Her name is Irene Desire King Arthur. She was a mother of 2. She had sickle cell, like I said. She had managed her pain at home, like many of us do. But in August in 2024, she was admitted to Frimley Park Hospital, where she died a few days later. Now, a post-mortem revealed the cause of her death as caused by blood clots, together with her sickle cell and a virus that she had contracted. But a witness statement was read out at the inquest from Irene's husband, Dominic. And in it, he said he had spent time with his wife in hospital and said she told him she felt she wasn't being listened to. And he was worried about the level of sickle cell or knowledge they had on sickle cell. And this is an ongoing problem. A lot of evidence surrounding a blood transfusion given to Irene on the 7th of August was shared. Her condition had deteriorated, and questions were asked about whether an earlier transfusion could have led to a different outcome. Dr. Lucinda Blake, the consultant hematologist at Frimley Park at the time, said tests were regularly being carried out, and Irene had been moved closer to the nurse's station for monitoring. She said, "We try our best to do the best patient-centered medicine." And the discussion with her was that we tried to avoid transfusion if we could. Now, when asked if an early transfusion could have saved her, she said, "Catastrophic emboli, which is blood clots, are difficult to survive whether you have sickle cell or not." And I'll just say in closing that Irene was a devoted mother. She was also successful in a career as aviation policy advisor, and she held a position with a charity helping people with Down syndrome and their families. I see the story under that you're on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's when someone goes in to hospital with a sickle cell crisis, whether it's what they call a simple, uncomplicated crisis or not, they really do have to have someone to advocate for them on their behalf, because you're in that kind of bone crunching pain, and if they give you opioids, it's very difficult to be able to speak for yourself. You need someone that knows what your issues are, and to be there with you throughout. Now, it surprises me that she had blood clots because they normally give a blood thinning injection. Certainly recently when, we had personal experience of a patient in hospital, whilst I was there, they received 2 blood thinning injections. And that is because you're less mobile, you're lying in the bed for most of the time when you're in hospital. And that's done, I think, for most people who have been in bed for a long time in hospital, because they don't want blood clots to be a further complication, much less someone with sickle cell who it's a struggle for them to even just be well. So so I would say that honestly, if people are in hospital with sickle cell, they need to reach out. And I know it's difficult because I speak to lots of people with sickle cell who say that they don't really want to tell people that they're in hospital, but really you should tell people because they might be able to come and advocate on your behalf. That's what we need. We need advocates for people with sickle cell, because it's no easy ride, honestly.
No, thank you. That's a good point. I mean, we don't, obviously, the inquiry hasn't finished as far as we know, so we don't know all the situation, but we do know that going into hospital with sickle cell, potential blood clots, and a virus is a level of complications that unfortunately can lead to these kind of scenarios. And so this whole idea that what Sister Oleander is saying about having to have someone who's there to advocate on your behalf, especially when you are in pain. Her husband seems to have been there, and his comments about kind of staff maybe not having that specialist knowledge. I mean, we started this section talking about the closing down of a day unit in Royal London. Now, that unit wouldn't have been of help in this particular case. Let's be very clear here, because this is what we would call, like a complex, multiple kind of like elements going on. But we do need staff who have that understanding of how complex these things can get. And I don't want to second guess the inquiry, but the question about if the transfusion had been given when it was suggested, earlier, could we have had a different outcome? And I guess that's what we're going to try and find out. So
I've just got a few comments on that.
Okay.
Oops. From Aseptica 1, they're supposed to be standard operating procedures to treat sickle cell patients that come into the hospital, and there are stages and steps that they need to take everywhere. And then she says, yes, that's right. Advocate, friends, relatives needs to be there to help if their immediate family are not available.
Yeah, thank you for those comments, and that's very true. The NICE guidelines do provide that framework, so that even staff that don't have that expertise can actually look and check through. I mean, when you're dealing with sickle cell, you kind of like have to refer to the hemoglobin, the specialist who has that expertise. But the NICE guidelines would kind of like have help there, and that is supposed to help mitigate this lack of specialist knowledge. It doesn't mean that hospitals can't call. I mean, I can't remember if if the NHS still does this, but there was a twinning kind of situation going on. So every hospital that didn't have a large number of sickle cell patients in their catchment area would twin with a hospital that did, so that they can always draw on them for their expertise. It doesn't sound like that happened in this case, but again, I don't know. We'll wait to see what comes out from this inquiry. But we just acknowledging the passing of our sister Irene beside King Arthur. She joined us at the age of 47, which is tragedy. You are watching the Galley's Pan-African Community News Update. As usual, if you're watching live, you're welcome to interact with us through Facebook or YouTube, just as you've seen. our system. Thank you for those comments. You can kind of like make a comment, give some advice, ask questions as well. That's all this kind of thing is useful. If you do like what you're seeing, what you're hearing, and find it useful, please feel free to share it on your channel, on your feed. I think, is that the right term? On your feed with others. Let others know what's going on so they can contribute and share with people who find this information useful. Now, the next section is a review of politics around the UK. And again, we're going to talk about what's taken place over the past couple of weeks. I'm going to start with, surprise, surprise, Reform has yet another racist member within its ranks. And I say has, I should really kind of like had, use the correct past tense. Reform's UK candidate for Redcar, Mike Manning, was dropped after the council candidate directed sickening insults at Jewish and Muslim communities, writing that there's something about circumcision that goes to their heads and all kinds of stupid things, making references to, I don't even want to say some of his comments actually, but derogatory comments referring to Kwanzaa, for example, and describing Nazis as peace-loving and democratically elected. So this is the quality, the caliber of the Reform's council candidates. He has eventually been dropped. This was after MPs in the area like Daisy Cooper from the Liberal Democrats said that Farage seems happy for this kind of person to represent him in public. He must kick these people out, and there's no space for these kind of awful views in British politics. Farage has done that before he kicked him out. He launched an investigation, and at a press conference on this topic earlier in the month, he claimed that their vetting process had been pretty bad. I mean, that's not the words he used, but that's what he's claiming. It's got nothing to do with them. It's just that they had a poor vetting process, and so a lot of racists got through. This is coming from the racist in chief itself. But this, again, is not much surprise in the shape of British politics as it is right now. If one isn't enough, a second Reform UK councillor has apologised for racist comments he made at a council meeting last year. There was a complaint lodged against him during his speech at a Gloucestershire County Council meeting in September 2025. I'm not even going to go through all the stuff that he said. Again, this one was targeting at Muslims, Muslim women in particular. He joined on Islamophobic stereotypes. He did apologise for any offence that he caused. Reform UK, the shape of British politics in 2026. And then, surprise, surprise, let's go for the hat trick. Two Leicestershire Reform councillors are now facing a backlash after posting support for the US immigration officers following a fatal shooting in America. And of course, I mentioned this earlier. I'm referring in particular to the killing of intensive care unit nurse Alex Pretty. And they claim that he had a gun, despite the victim's family insisting he was holding a phone when he was shot by Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers, ICE, that's what they're called. These are the federal agents who are terrorizing the people of Minneapolis and Minnesota. The Border Patrol agent shot dead 37-year-old Mr. Pretty on January the 24th following protests against the policy. He did have a gun, legally owned, concealed gun, which he had a permit to carry, but he didn't have it in his hand. They executed him, and the footage is online, accessible, and most people can see that it was an extrajudicial murder in plain sight. But these Reform councillors decided to justify that, claiming that he was right. He was doing that, saying that these people were doing heroic work, saving the United States of America. Those are the exact words, heroic work. They also went on to say that Pretty was attacking law enforcement and had a gun, and the shooting was clear-cut. And of course, this is complete nonsense. Even the orange one in the White House is starting to pull back from that. The councillors in Leicestershire County Council said the posts were deeply offensive and wholly unacceptable, and fell far below the standards the public is expected from elected representatives. Reforming MPs and councillors are going to be doing the racist stuff that Reform MPs and councillors do, right? It's just more and more of the same. Let's go to I don't know if it's Tory 2 or Reform 2, but let's go to the Conservatives right now. And in an act to try and humanise the party, Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch has said that she initially joined the Tories for the party aspect of it, saying that she loved the socialising, the drinks, the hanging out with other young people. She was speaking on BBC Radio 4's Desert Island Discs, and she said that after university, all her friends had gone all over the world, and she decided that actually joining the party would be a fun thing to do. And that's where she met her husband through the membership of the Conservatives, and said, Essex is very much my personality. I call myself an Essex girl. I mean, this is the leader of the Conservative Party as it is right now. And it's not normally the sort of story that we would cover until you realise that actually what's happened is that the Tory party is actually morphing. So the Tory party has excreted another couple of members this month from its ranks, and they have joined the Reform Party, which is rapidly becoming the Tory Party too. And the latest recruit, the latest Conservative MP to defect to Nigel Farage's Reform UK is the former Home Secretary Sarah Braverman. That's a particularly toxic MP. Farage's far right, I say far right, hard right, straight out racist party has in fact attracted around 21 former Conservative MPs. Essentially, it's very difficult to say that the Reform Party is different from the Conservative Party. They're essentially the same party, one led by someone who sees themselves as an Essex girl, and the other one who doesn't think that his racism when he was younger is something he needs to apologise for. I'm not really going to say much about Braverman's defection or that of Robert Jenrick. There's been quite a few recently. I will say that one thing I personally am looking forward to is when they start their usual shenanigans and the backstabbing over leadership takes place, because when you have that number of Conservatives inside the Reform Party, at some stage they will do what Tories do, which is backstab the leader, and that should actually be very entertaining for us all to watch on the outside. But in the moment right now, we can see there's no real political choice for any electorate, and this is quite worrying if you follow those kind of things, because May the 7th is the day of the crucial local elections in which Reform is hoping to make significant gains, and Labour's expected to be to take a hammering, especially after its poor decision about excluding Andy Burnham from standing. But I'm going to leave that one there. That's the last one for this section. Enough about the dirty politics in the UK. You are watching Galley's Pan-African Community News Update. I think you know the usual. If you're live, you can interact with us through Facebook or YouTube. Please, Sister Oleander is manning the post, so you can send messages and stuff, and you can talk to each other. And don't forget to like and share if you find this broadcast useful. Now, the next section is a review of policing around the UK from over the past couple of weeks. And I'm going to start off with the story that we've covered in the past of a Metropolitan Police officer who tasered a suspected burglar, who then fell from a wall and suffered injuries that made him tetraplegic. Now, PC Liam Newman, 31, who you see in the image, has been found not guilty of assault or occasioning grievous bodily harm following a trial at Southwark Crown Court. Now, the man you can see in the image at the top, Leonard Sandiford, 61, now forced to use a wheelchair, was running away from the police in Woodford Green, East London, when he reached a cul-de-sac, climbed on an outbuilding and fell after being tasered in the 24th of April 2022. Now, the police officer Newman pled not guilty following an investigation by the IOPC. He said that he had felt he was in imminent danger of harm from the suspect and believed the tasering was a preemptive strike. He also said he had an honest belief that people in the property were at imminent risk of harm from the suspect. And I say this, I raised those particular comments and I include those in this article because you had to understand that Sandiford, and I'm not going to make excuses for him being suspected in the act of burglary, but he was running. and so he seems like he was shot in the back, and he was somewhere else on, on top of this outbuilding, and before he crashed down. So this argument about being in imminent danger of harm from the suspect, or this argument that he had an honest belief that the people in the properties were at imminent risk of harm from the suspect, is a load of nonsense. And this is a defense that we hear used over and over again. This argument that if someone is, if a police officer or an enforcement officer kills someone, they're acting in a split second because they're in fear of their life in that particular instant. And this is very problematic, but it's worked for Liam Newman, and he won't be the last one that this defense will be used again to escape justice. I say that knowing that the next story is about Chris Cabba. He was a man who was shot dead by a police marksman in September 2022. And the family are actually devastated that the misconduct proceedings against the officer have been paused by the IOPC, the Independent Office of Police Conduct, the same group that we just spoke about. They said that they're now going to wait to issue gross misconduct papers against the police officer, Martin Blake, who shot him, as a legal challenge is expected to come into force in spring over the tests used to bring criminal charges and misconduct proceedings against officers over use of force. And now what's happening here is that the police are pushing back. They're saying that they don't want their officers' actions to be scrutinized when someone dies. And, if we know anything about human rights legislation, the most important part, Article 1 is the right to life. And so whenever someone does lose their life, there is a right to find out and to make sure that, there was no abuse, that that no illegality took place. And so it's right that these officers should be suspended and there should be an investigation into it. But what's happening now is that the Metropolitan Police Force is pushing back. There's going to be new guidelines, new rulings that say that actually if they murder someone, well, you know what, if they have fear of their life, let it be. We don't need to prosecute them. And so the IOPC is saying that it's going to pause its investigation into misconduct, into gross misconduct, really kind of implies that they've already made a decision in this particular case, that they're deciding already that, once these rules are in place, we can just drop the work. We don't have to do anything on this. I mean, the family is saying it's quite correct that the officer involved was facing disciplinary proceedings. But again, now they're not. Just in case you want to know the background of this one, so no one call me double standards. In this particular incident, Cabba's car was being followed by the police in South London. It'd been linked to a previous shooting in Brixton. This is a narrative that we've been told. It was stopped by Blake, the police officer, and his colleagues. And after being boxed in by police cars during the stop, Cabba was driving backwards and forwards, trying to get his way free. Now, at his trial, Blake said he feared for his and his colleagues' lives, that he thought they were going to be killed or injured by the way the car was driven. And that's why he murdered him. That's why he shot him in the face or whatever it was. He was cleared of murder after an Old Bailey trial, but he is still facing, like I said, gross misconduct proceedings over the shooting. And that decision has been branded nonsensical by a group called the Metropolitan Police Federation. And the Metropolitan Police Federation are the rank and file union, if you want. They're the body that sticks up for the police no matter what they do, even when they're engaging in the most outrageous racist practices. The Federation stands up for them. And so it looks like they're going to win their way in this way, that they're going to get Martin Blake off, and the family won't have their day in, I won't say in court because the Crown Court, the Old Bailey dismissed this, but they won't have their day in the tribunal with the IOPC, kind of like investigating him for gross misconduct. It's a horrible situation, but again, we have to report this and be aware of what's taking place at all different levels. And the last story for on this section for this week is oh god, I can't even stand looking. Sorry, I shouldn't say that, so unprofessional. It just irritates me. The Home Secretary has said she rejects suggestions that making live facial recognition available to all police forces in England and Wales contributes to Big Brother society. And those of you who won't know is that there's a group, what's it called, Big Brother Watch, I think it is, and Liberty. They were in court this week. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it because, like I said, my son was was in hospital a week. I did want to go, and the police are defending it. The Home Secretary is defending this. She's saying that she makes no apology for the policy, and she believes it will help detect criminals while allowing people to go about their daily business in safety. So what the police or the government are planning to do is increase the number of live facial recognition vans available to be deployed from 10 to 50. And this is all going to be part of a reform to policing. We have spoken about this for quite some time. I'm not going to go into all the detail, but just so you understand why I'm concerned, essentially, this is the situation where you have, it's not going to be vans now. So you have vans, but you also have these light posts in certain places, and they're just scanning your face as you walk past them and then checking you off against criminals. So what's happening is that you are being put into a lineup of criminals without your consent, without your knowledge. Now, the whole argument is that your details and everyone's details are scanned and compared, just check to see if there's a warrant out for you. And if, there's nothing flagged up, then they destroy your biometric data. That's the theory. I mean, we saw what happened with the Matrix, the gang Matrix, right? Where people who are related to those on the Matrix were also being harassed in their life, being interfered with by the state. In this particular case, the police are saying that, look, we're just going to scan everyone. We're going to keep all your information. And then, while we're doing the check, and if nothing comes up, we'll delete it. The problem with these kind of systems is that, people say they'll delete it like after 24 hours, then it becomes 48 hours, then it becomes after a week, then it becomes after a year. And before you know it, your biometric data is stored on these systems permanently. And then if you add the fact that these systems make mistakes, and that, so that they used the case of the brother in Tottenham, I've forgotten his name now, the one who works with the group that patrols the streets for our community. They used that case where he was misidentified and he was detained on the street, and he had to get his passport to prove he was who he was. If you check that and you see that they're scanning people at places like Carnival, you see the potential for serious abuse with these kind of systems. But irrespective of that, the Home Secretary has said that there's always a concern when new technology is adopted. She says that this used to happen with fingerprinting and DNA samples. People are against it, but she says that this is the thing that we have to do to make you safe. And it's not as simple as that argument. People always say, you've got nothing to be frightened. You've got nothing to be frightened of, or if you've done nothing wrong, you've got nothing to be frightened of. That's not the case from people from minority ethnic communities. The system's biased against us, and the problems are stacked against us. And if you understand that the technology that's being used is linked to Israel's war on Gaza, then you understand that this is a lethal technology which has serious implications. But the government has decided to go ahead with it anyway. Labour government. Okay, that's the last on that section. My voice is going. Okay, you are watching the Galleys Pan-African Community News Update. My apologies. I need to get to sit. My voice is going. Need a co-host, I think. If you're watching live, if you are watching live, sorry, you're welcome to interact with us. Facebook, YouTube. By now, you know what to do. Sister Oleander's manning the chat. You can ask questions, pop things up, talk to each other, share views, all that sort of stuff. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to share. I keep saying all these kind of things because that's kind of like how it goes. But this next section is a review of expressions of white supremacy and violent Afrophobia in the UK, around the UK, and over the last fortnight. I might spread it a little bit wider than the UK. I am going quite at pace because we have quite a jam-packed program. I want to get through everything, and I want to try and do it under 2 hours. I don't ever want the program to go more than 2 hours. In fact, I'm trying to get to 90 minutes, but the last fortnight has been pretty jam-packed, and that's even with us not putting everything in. So the first story is that of our elder pensioner, Juliet Nabakwe, who has been left frightened and had to leave their home after a racially aggravated attack. She's 79 years of age, and her daughter's Channel Hudson is 52. They were at home on New Year's Eve in 2024 when they heard a man shout, "You smelly," and I'm not going to use the word, and yes, you are effing, and the word mongrels outside their window. They violently come up with this racist abuse. Police came round, which is really interesting. The police came round to take a statement some hours later, which is quite good. Hours, not so good, but they did come round, and I'll give them props for that. But unfortunately for the man, he also came round and smashed the family's window with a hammer 16 times. So the police were in the house when he smashed the window with the hammer. And so there's footage of the incident caught on family's CCTV camera. And the two South Wales police officers ran out the door and chased this guy, Philip O'Connell, 40 years of age. And in a short pursuit, they finally got him. They arrested him. And and hopefully that's kind of like the end of that. He'll be prosecuted the whole lot. Now, our sister Juliet was born in the Caribbean, but she moved to Wales aged 10 and grew up in Cardiff. She went to school in the city, spent her working years in the NHS and as a community learning support worker. She's only ever given back to the community that she's lived in since childhood. Now she has to be cared for full-time by her daughter, as she is constantly shaking and suffering from post-traumatic stress. Her daughter Chanel said they were both traumatized by the abuse. I mean, the thing is that if the police hadn't come round and hadn't been there when he returned and started slashing in the window with the hammer, who knows what could have happened. And so, again, we're just sharing this with you. This is what's taking place in the UK. This is a story. I saw this article at the last program and I forgot to include it. It's something I want to talk about. I haven't got time to go into details on this, but there's been some research which shows, and this is probably not a surprise to many of you, that right-wing movements, and when I say right-wing movements, I just think racist movements, because that's how I always tend to see it. The R stands for racist, the L stands for liberal. Right-wing movements or racist movements are struggling to gain support amongst graduates as education emerges as the most important dividing line in British attitudes towards politics, diversity, and immigration. And this is what the research is finding out, that the more educated you are, especially if you go towards higher education, the less likely you are to be racist. It's not saying there is no racism. We saw that with the professors and the promotions. And so we know there's certainly racism, even postgraduates. But this is what statistics are saying. So this is a study being conducted by the Independent National Centre for Social Research, which found people with qualifications below A-level were more than twice as likely to support right-wing parties compared with those with qualifications above. Now, the Demographic Divides report says a person with no educational qualifications had around 2 times the odds of voting for either the Conservatives or Reform UK than someone with a university degree or higher. And the reason I wanted to share this a couple of weeks ago is because I kind of want us to just have in our mind that when you hear about defunding of universities, defunding of education programs, of keeping people deliberately politically illiterate, kind of like not opening, opportunities for them to expand their minds, to come in contact with other human beings, to kind of like think these things through. There's a reason why this strategy is in place, because again, like the statistics are showing, this research, this fresh research, is that 2 times more likely to vote for Conservatives or Reform. And there's a quote from one of the researchers: if one wanted to predict whether a person voted for parties of the right in the UK, knowing their educational background would give them a good chance of making a correct prediction. Now, these findings are to some extent mirrored in the US, where people with a high school education or lower were twice as likely as college graduates to support Donald Trump over Kamala Harris in the 2024 election. And this is kind of what took place. And this is why Charlie Kirk was so influential, because he was reaching out to those young people who kind of like were really not into education and mobilized them to vote. Now, in the UK, the research found that 65% of people educated degree level or above thought that diversity strengthened society, compared with 30% of people educated to A level or below. Now, in the US, that statistic is 74%. So, if you think how high that is, that's almost 3/4 of the population of college graduates thought that diversity strengthened society, compared with 54% educated to high school level or less. So education really has a massive impact on how people think about migration, how they think about diversity, and who they vote for. There is more statistics. The research found that 55% of people in the UK with below A-level qualifications thought that immigrants living in the country without permission should not be allowed to stay, compared with 36% of degree holders. So, we'll start to see more statistics, digging down on this. You can read the article and get some of the details on The Guardian and stuff like that. But it's a fascinating story. I find it a fascinating story. Yeah. I'll move on from there. This is a recurring story, or the backdrop of this recurring, but the latest development of this is that European farmers in Zimbabwe are now turning to the Trump administration for support in their campaign to reclaim $3.5 billion in compensation over land seized by the state during the 2000s. And I chuckle there because these European farmers are asking for 3.5 billion from the orange one in the White House in compensation or reparation. And yet in the UK, when the church has said that it's actually going to, make a contribution of £100 million for its role in the enslavement of African people, which clearly isn't enough, but it's a good start. There's outcry. Okay, so 3.5 billion for this minority group in Zimbabwe. Now, they have hired a US lobbying firm with ties to the US president to make their case. And they're trying to capitalize on the White House allegation that Europeans in South Africa are being discriminated against by African majority governments. Now, this is because, the orange one is repeatedly making claims of a genocide against Europeans in South Africa. And this has been widely debunked. It's complete nonsense. But it is true that thousands of European farmers in Zimbabwe had their land violently seized in the 2000s under what some people, I don't think it was, called a controversial land reform program intended to address colonial era land grabs. It was a land redistribution program. The idea that it was a land grab or whatever is quite nonsense. But the US president has now painted himself as the great so-called white hope. He did this recently in a racism-drenched speak at Davos, where he attacked so many different groups, including in particularly Africans from Somalia, in the most hateful Afrophobic content from a US president in a long while. I mean, not to forget, he refers to the motherland as an S-hole. This is, people are looking to him now to help them to turbocharge their racist ideas and policies and try to milk Africa for everything they can get, because America is no longer there to help. And I would argue that it never helped in the first place, but that's another discussion for another day. Let me move on. Talking about America, America not helping. Okay, so the headline is Philadelphia sues US government over removal of memorial to enslaved Africans. Now, just to let you know, that there was this memorial in place at the former presidential home to George Washington and John Adams in Philadelphia. And the municipal government is now suing the US government because the Department of Interior and National Park Service, NPS, is acting outside of its authority. And this is what they claim. Now, the memorial, or the exhibits, memorialized the 9 individuals Washington enslaved during his tenure in Philadelphia as the nation was being founded. But the Trump administration had targeted display as part of its broader review of national park materials that might so-called inappropriate disparage the United States. And so anything that kind of like talks truth, kind of like shows this history and it has got anything to do with reparation, repairing the damage, correcting the narrative, is being ripped down by this current administration. So according to Courthouse News, the removal of the exhibit entitled The President's House, Freedom and Slavery in the Making of a New Nation was originally supposed to take place 4 months earlier on the 17th of September 2025. It was designed as part of an agreement between the City of Philadelphia and the NPS in 2006. The agreement designated that the NPS, which is the National Park Service, and the city had equal rights to final design approval. And the city now alleges that while the federal agency was granted full property rights to the project in 2015, that transfer of power did not include any rights to alteration. So it shouldn't have had the right to take them down. And so this is what the argument is. We can only hope that the courts reverse that. But of course, with the Oranges ones, people inside the Supreme Court, even if it went that high, there's no guarantee that justice will be served. Literally writing history. Now, this is history in the making. The family of the murderless Congolese independence icon Patrice Lumumba. So they hope to get justice as a Belgian court waits prosecuting the sole surviving suspect over his murder in 1961. Now, if you think this is some 65 years after he was executed and his body dissolved in acid by separatists with the help of mercenaries from the former colonial power Belgium, only one ex-official is still alive to face justice. Now, we also know the CIA was involved in that, but the fact that there is someone still alive who is responsible for this is what this case is about. So in 2002, it's important to remember that Brussels formally apologized for its role in Lumumba's murder. And 20 years later, it returned a tooth to his family. And that's Lumumba's only known remains. That's how bad it is. They put his body in acid, and the tooth was the only remaining. Now, this person who's still alive, a 93-year-old named Etienne Davignon, a one-time European commissioner who was a novice Belgian diplomat at the time of Lumumba's murder, is the person that we want to see face justice. Just for those of you who are unfamiliar with the history, I explained how he was murdered. I didn't explain the aftermath. After his murder, Congo was thrown into decades of dictatorship under Mobutu, who was a tin pot dictator, kind of like endorsed by the West, who seized power in the 1965 coup and led the country until it was overthrown in 1997. He was imposed on the Africans in Congo by the West. Now, Lumumba's relatives have long pushed all over, like we're talking about 15 years onwards, for what they say is a long overdue legal reckoning over the complicity of Belgian officials in his murder. They say, and this is rightly so, we cannot turn back time, but we are counting on the Belgian justice system to do its job and shed light on history. Now, this is comments from his Lumumba's granddaughter. She's 33 years old, Yema Lumumba. And she said this outside a Brussels court this week, ahead of a closed door hearing on whether he's going to be prosecuted. And he is accused by the Belgian federal prosecutors of involvement in the unlawful detention and transfer of Lumumba, as well as humiliating and degrading treatment. So he's not going to be charged with the murder, but they are trying to get him on these other charges. It's very important to know that the killing of Lumumba, who became prime minister at independence in the 1960s, is one of the many, many tragic and horrific chapters in the grim history of Belgium, involved in what became the modern Democratic Republic of Congo. Christopher Marchand, the lawyer for the family, said refusing this trial would amount to definitively confirming the impunity for major colonial crimes. And this is an important case, because if we're seeing what's going on with America, taking people out, out of their bedrooms in their pajamas, and violating international law, executing people on the high seas in the Caribbean, these are colonial crimes. And we need to know that in time, even if we don't see it in our lifetime, that those who are guilty and those who are culpables, those who profit from it, face justice. So that's what this case is about. It might be taken 15 years of campaigning to get here, but it's good that they're doing that. And what I want to close this article on is, the story on is, it's basically related to it, but some sad news is that Lumumba's youngest son, Roland Gilbert Okito Lumumba, joined the ancestors at the age of 67 following an illness. Now we know his funeral is going to take place this week. And I just want to say we remember. The final story for this section is that there are now calls for the British monarch to formally apologise for African enslavement. And this is a call that's coming from MPs, experts, and campaigners after researchers highlighted how the monarchy and Royal Navy extended and protected the crime of enslaving African people for hundreds of years. Now, the British King has previously expressed personal sorrow at the suffering caused by slavery and spoken of committing to finding creative ways to right inequalities that endure. However, the British Crown as an institution has never issued a formal apology. And it's really important when I say he expressed personal sorrow, because that talks about him on an individual level. The apology that needs to come is for the monarch as an institution, the Crown as an institution, on a systemic, institutionalized way. Now, a new book called The Crown's Silence, published this week, details how monarchs from Queen Elizabeth I to George IV used the criminal enterprise in enslaved people to boost the Crown's revenues and defend the British Empire. It builds on the BBC documentary I told you about, the one I took part in, What's the Monarchy For? And you can still watch that on iPlayer. Now, our MP, the Labour in Clapham and Brixton Hill MP, Belle Ribeiro Addy, who chairs the all-party parliamentary group for African reparations, said that personal soul did not benefit one of the single greatest crimes against humanities. This isn't about individuals, but the monarchy as an institution. She's 100% correct. What is needed is not simply an apology on behalf of the Crown, but acknowledgement of the history and action to address its lasting legacies of global racism and inequality. An apology would be the basis for honest conversation and transformation we need to have as a country around this issue in a swiftly changing world. Now, the Runnymede Trust, which in September published a report called Reparations, offered a blueprint for reparative justice, saying that the apology from him would be a welcome symbolic first step, but must be supported by action. Of course, the Legali organization agrees with this approach, that an apology is a first step, but the reality of Afrophobia across Europe and how it impacts the lives of African people, it has blighted the lives of millions since, during and since. And until that's addressed in a substantive way, a personal apology doesn't mean very much. Okay, that's the last story for that section. You are watching the Legali's Pan-African Community News Update. This section is called World News. As ever, you're free to chat, to tweet, to hit the like button, to share it, all that kind of stuff. But I'm going to go over the world news relating to our community over the past 2 weeks. I spoke about Congo. I spoke about Lumumba. We're going to return to that theme later on about Lumumba. But right now, I want to start this section with news that more than 200 people were killed this week in a collapse at the Rubaya coltan mine in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, most of us probably haven't heard about this story, but that's 200 people. Many bodies are still buried under the mud following the tragedy. We still do not have their names. And this is part of the problem, right? It's like if their lives are worthless. And why does this matter to us in the West and how we cope? Well, because more than 15% of the world's supply of tantalum, a rare metal extracted from coltan, comes from the region, and it's a key component in smartphones as well as computers and aircraft engines. So these deaths are the price that we are collectively paying as African people for the products that get renewed and sold all over the world: computers, smartphones, aircrafts, all this kind of stuff. Now, in this particular case, the mines are under the control of a rebel group, M23, and a spokesperson for the rebel-appointed governor said the landslide was caused by heavy rain. Now, I've got no reason to doubt that. It probably was caused by heavy rain. But one of the situations is that why are people risking their lives in these? If you've seen the inside of these mines, it's atrocious. No human being should be risking their lives to go down there. They get a few dollars a day for this. And on this site, we have, and also included within the victims, not just minors, but also children and market women. This is an ongoing story. It seems to be muted. We don't hear enough about it. We don't hear much about it because, of course, most of us want our shiny new toys. And if, a few hundred people are dying every week to bring the latest iPhone, for some of us, that seems okay. It's not okay. And this is the legacy of the people who murdered Lumumba and imposed Mobutu on the nation. Another tragic story is that Makoko, a historic floating fishing community in Lagos, has been thrown into crisis following an ongoing demolition exercise by the Lagos state government. Now, you can see in the image the devastation that's been caused. Thousands of residents, many of them women, children, widows, and the elderly, have been rendered homeless, with families now sleeping inside canoes, under open skies, and beside the lagoon. Now, entire rows of wooden houses and shops have been pulled down, leaving behind broken planks, scattered household items, and a community struggling to survive. Makoko, which has often been described as Africa's largest floating slum, that's the term that they use, not me, is a home to fishermen, traders, and artisans whose lives are intricately tied to the lagoon. For many residents, the demolition has not only erased their homes, but also severed their means of survival. Now, the demolition in this region began quietly in December. Many residents said that the demolition activity started in parts of Makoko long before the issue gained even public attention. So it was done quietly. And according to them, the operation expanded gradually, moving deeper and deeper into the community with little engagement or dialogue. One resident says they started one side and kept moving. And, this person who's a community elder has lived in Makoko for over 2 decades. He continues, at first we thought it would stop, then it kept coming closer. Every day, one house after another. By January, it became massive. That was when we knew they wanted to wipe out all of us in the name of development and infrastructure. Everything we done finish. This is what he said. Now, recently, over the last few days, Nigerian police have fired tear gas to disperse residents who are protesting in Lagos about this. And one of the biggest problems is not that the local authority wants to improve the area. I mean, I don't think anyone's got a problem if you're going to build up infrastructure and improve the area. But what we're hearing is that since demolition, which displaced residents, the Lagos state government has not provided any internally displaced persons camps or even temporary shelter. So they've been left to fend for their own. So this is an awful story. Again, many of us are unaware this is taking place in Nigeria. And, that's the point of this program. One story that has got mass coverage over the media over the last couple of weeks was, the kind of like the chaotic scenes that took place at the African final. And just 10 days afterwards, what happened is that the governing body, CAF, of the African Cup of Nations has issued fines worth more than $1 million and banned players from both finalists. Now, a statement has been released from them saying that the Senegal Football Federation has been fined a total of $615,000 for the unsporting conduct of their players and technical staff in violation of the CAF disciplinary code principles of fair play, loyalty, and integrity. While the Senegal coach, Papi Friar, has been banned for 5 of the 6 2027 African qualifying matches and handed an individual fine of $100,000 for bringing the game into disrepute. I don't want to go through what happened, and most of you know that I'm not the most expert when it comes to, I don't have expert knowledge when it comes to football. But what I do know, I saw some of the news footage, is that the final saw Senegal walk off in protest at Morocco being given a late penalty after a video assistant referee review. Moments after, Senegal had a goal disallowed. And then following that, fans tried to storm the field with journalists fighting amongst each other, leading to a 15-minute delay. And this all caused kind of problems. It just escalated and stuff like this. There are some really, I don't want to say racist comments, because that's probably the wrong word, but there are some biased comments which kind of trying to imply that because this conflict took place in Africa, this is a bad image for Africa. It's typical that it's Africa. It's only going to happen in Africa. And that's actually quite nonsense. These kind of things happen when the stakes are high, emotions are flying high, people feel like they've been aggrieved. It doesn't just happen in Africa. I'm not pretending, I'm not trying to say that it was a great example of sportsmanship, even though, I'm not the person to talk about those kind of topics. But it is just something to bear in mind that, kind of like, it's interesting how much media focus this has and how people are using it to kind of like hammer at the African nations tournament. I'm going to move on from there because, like I said, football's not really my thing. What's the next story? Okay, so moving to the US, and a former deputy has been from Illinois in America has been sentenced to 20 years for fatally shooting an African American woman named Sonia Massey, who called 911 for help. Now, when I read this story, you'll understand why I'm covering it, because it's very similar and familiar to what happens in the UK. So Sean Grayson, the officer in the image, was convicted in October 2025 of second-degree murder. You can see he's a Euro-American. He received a maximum possible sentence, has been in police custody since being charged in the killing. Now, Grayson did apologize during the sentencing, saying he wished he could bring Macy back and spare her family the pain he caused. I can't talk to his sincerity or not, but the judge heard from Massey's parents and 2 children, who urged the judge to carry out justice in Sonia's name. Let's say you know what happened. In the early morning hours of July the 6th, 2024, Massey, who struggled with mental health issues, called the emergency responders because she feared there was a prowler outside her Springfield home. So she called for help because she thought she could hear something outside. So the deputies entered her home, and then Grayson noticed the pot on the stove and ordered the family to move it. Now, instead, Massey went to the stove, retrieved the pot, and teased Grayson for moving away from the hot steaming water. From this moment, the exchange quickly escalated. Massey said, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus." And at that point, Grayson drew his sidearm, yelled at her to drop the pan. She set the pot down and ducked behind a counter, but she appeared to pick it up again. And that's when Grayson opened fire on the 30-year-old single mother, shooting her in the face. What do you think his defense was? His defense was he testified that he feared Macy would scald him. He feared for his own safety. Now, this killing raised new questions about US law enforcement shootings of African people in their home. And I'm going to come back to that theme about shooting African people in their homes, not just on the streets, in their home. He shot her in the face. Okay. Civil rights attorney Ben Crump negotiated a $10 million settlement with Sangamon County for Massey's relatives, but none of that brings her back. Him going to jail doesn't bring her back. The children are now orphaned. This is an ongoing story, and we are familiar, we're used to people who are calling for help, or family members calling the authorities for help. And in their calling for help, their loved ones are dying. So this is, ongoing situation, not just in the UK, also in the US. And I say that as I go into the next story. Many of us in the UK will be unfamiliar with the CNN host Don Lemon, and he very passionate, very strong, very integrity-minded, very vigorous journalist. Now, he's been arrested along with Georgia Fort and charged for being around an anti-ICE protest in a Minnesota church. And it's really important to understand the context here. So he no longer works with CNN. He has a YouTube channel, but he still does investigative journalism work. And what's happened is that the pastor who was there, one of the pastors in the church, was said to be an immigration enforcement officer, so one of the ICE officers. And so he was there to cover this story. But this escalated pretty badly. Now, Lemon was arrested. They disrupted the service after the protesters did. Lemon says, "I'm not going to be silenced." He's been charged with conspiracy to provide rights and interfere in religious freedoms by obstructing someone's First Amendment rights by force. That's what he's been charged with, because he wanted to find out, how can you be a pastor and yet support racist anti-immigration policy, which is violently killing people and deporting people on behalf of the Trump administration. So he was taken into custody by federal agents. He didn't enter a plea in court. But who else was also subject to this? Well, in the image you can see Georgia Fort. She was also there, also doing her job as a journalist. She was also arrested. Not then. What happened is that they came to her house and arrested her. So again, understanding this trend that's happening, she live streamed the arrest because they came at 6:30 in the morning. Had no idea this was coming, and that's what you can see, the image of the officer outside. So she had the mindset to film it. And what does it say when a journalist has to live stream herself being arrested in the house because she's very worried and she's conscious that there's a chance that she might not leave her home alive? What does that say about so-called justice in America? What does it say about the judicial system when that's the conditions that she's facing? Now, the U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi, I don't even want to talk about, has said that the activists Chaheem Jean Cruz and Jamil Lidil Lundy have also been arrested. It's important to understand what's going on, and link this to the previous story as well. This is an ongoing issue in America right now. We know that the current Home Secretary wants to import the idea, and so does the Reform, and so does the Tory party, want to kind of import the idea of ICE having a police, an FBI, to go after migrants in the UK, and they started changing policy. We'll cover that if that happens, and we'll push back against that if that happens. But what I also want to show you and share with you is that these protests that are taking place have escalated, not because migrants are being killed or deported unfairly or families separated, but because there's been straight out murder being video recorded of Euro Americans, and it's been captured. And so the murder of Rene Good, I don't need to tell you what happened. You've seen that. The murder of Alex Pretty, I don't need to tell you about that. You've seen that. These ideas that Europeans who are doing the right thing, fighting to protect their neighbors, are being murdered by US officials has caused outrage on the streets of America. But the one name that's being missed from this narrative is that of Keith Porter. And this is an African American who was also murdered by an off-duty immigration police officer. We seem, especially outside the US, we seem completely unaware that he is also part of this narrative. His death, his life matters, is part of this narrative. And the fact that journalists are now being threatened for reporting and investigating on this is something we have to be mindful of. We have to keep an eye on this, because in the UK, we've seen our journalists lose their jobs. We're seeing them be defunded. We're seeing platforms like, I used to write for the New Nation. It was defunded before we had the word defunded, partly because some of the articles I was writing, I always feel responsible for this. Speaking the truth attracts powerful opponents. So yeah, I'll share that. Let's hope that Don and Georgia and those activists kind of like, they squash these charges and can live their lives. But already, just being arrested and charged in this way has a massive impact on their life in a detrimental way. Okay, the last story on this section is, I don't know, this probably should have been in the good news section, actually. That's because I'm sarky. Over the last, God, I was going to say few months, but it's actually years now, South Africa and Israel have been engaging in a tit-for-tat argument, and it's kind of like escalated into an expulsion of senior diplomats. You see, because what's happened is that South Africa now has actually ordered Israel's what they call charge d'affaires to leave the country within 72 hours, citing insulting attacks on their president, Cyril Ramaphosa, on social media. Now, Ariel Seidman, the charge d'affaires at Israel's embassy in Pretoria, was declared persona non grata by South Africa's Department of International Relations and Cooperation in a statement on its website on Friday. And this is a really interesting story, because, of course, this is what happens when a diplomat comes into your country. They have diplomatic immunity. But if they go so far that they're insulting the nation, they're insulting hospitality, it is from the rights for that nation to say, you know what, you're no longer welcome in this country. And this is really, like I say, a tit for tat, because Israel started all this nonsense. As we know, the Zionist policies, the anger about South Africa leading the charge against the genocide they've committed against Palestinians. I could go into all the details of that, but I don't really think I need to. All I will say, I mean, there's more and more about what Israel said and kind of like why it's gone back and forth. But I think I want to leave this section with a reminder that in January 2024, the International Court for Justice ruled that the claim of genocide was plausible. Now, even though the case has since slowed, experts don't really expect an answer to 2027. People now recognize that this is what's been taking place, even though Israel continues to reject accusations of genocide as outrageous and false. And they've been excluding and targeting South African diplomats and engaging in Afrophobia, which is why this situation has escalated. They hate South Africa now for leading this charge to kind of like to criminalize genocide and to expose kind of like the outrageous and inhumane acts of war crimes of the Israeli state. So that's where this is coming from. But yeah, I'll leave it there. Whew. Okay. This is the last section. You are watching the Galleys Pan-African Community News Update. Yeah, wow. Okay. Was it 1 hour 40 minutes? Okay, I was going to try and do this under 2 hours. Looks like we're doing it, not 1 hour 30. Thank you for being with us. This is the last section. It's called Being Positive, because I think after all of that, we do need some positive news. If you're watching live, you're welcome to interact with us through Facebook or YouTube as ever. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share if you find this broadcast useful. And I'm going to now try and share some of the positive news related to our community over the past couple of weeks. Now, of course, I can't cover everything, but there are some good things that are taking place and things that have taken place. So I'll kind of cover that. It's just Oleander's in the studio, so if you have chats and stuff you want to share and stuff like that, please send her a message, and then she'll jump on and let me know and stuff and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, let me move on. So, first story. We often hear about this this conflict between Africans from the continent, Africans from the diaspora, fighting this kind of like, back and forth in the UK. When I was younger, it was kind of epitomized between Lola Ayonrinde and Diane Abbott, and different generations kind of squashed that beef, and it comes back and it's squashed. The reality is that we are all African people, it's one of the Pan-Africanists, and whilst the children will continue with the squabbles, the grown-ups in the house are making some amazing deals. And in this particular case, Jamaica and Ghana have reached an agreement on a labour exchange arrangement under which Ghanaian teachers and nurses will be deployed to the Caribbean country, creating overseas job opportunities for local professionals while deepening bilateral relations. And this is an amazing and fantastic development. Now, the agreement was disclosed by Ghana's Minister for Foreign Affairs, Mr. Samuel Okudetsu Ablakwa, after talks with Jamaica's Prime Minister, that's Dr. Andrew Michael Holness, during an official visit by a Ghanaian delegation. Now, they shared this news via Facebook last week and said that the discussions covered special labour exchange program expected to begin within the year. Now, he did not state the number of teachers and nurses to be engaged or outline the detailed terms of the engagement, but we know that it's moving forward. And this is really good news as far as I'm concerned. Mr. Ablakwa said that Dr. Holness conveyed thanks to the President and people of Ghana for support offered following the destruction caused by Hurricane Melissa. And according to her foreign minister, the Jamaican leader described the gesture as one that Jamaica would always remember. Now, the talks also included plans to initiate a Ghana-Jamaica Defence Cooperation Agreement, pointing to a broadening of relations beyond diplomacy and cultural links. And this is important if you think about the world we're in, where you're seeing Britain going off down to East Asia to make links with China, to make links with Japan, in anticipation of a breakdown of NATO and America gone rogue. At the global level, Dr. Holness pledged support for President Mahathir's proposed United Nations resolution seeking recognition of the transatlantic enslavement of African people as the greatest crime against humanity and renewed calls for reparations. So this is where we're seeing nation states saying, look, we're going to support you and we're going to give you a vote if we're going to talk about recognizing Ma'afa as a crime against humanity and the call for reparations. And to see that happen on a Pan-African level is beautiful for me. So that's one good news. The next story is about a Ghanaian computer engineering student called Tyrone Iris McGuy. My apologies if I've mispronounced the name. He's now at the University of Pennsylvania, but this young man has designed and built a working computer brain from scratch in his dorm room. Now, his work, which is a fully functional 8-bit arithmetic logic unit, an ALU they call them, which is a core component of computer central processing unit. So you'll hear about the CPU, the part that does the maths is called ALU. But he made this with just around 3,500 discrete transistors, and this is a serious accomplishment. Now, according to him, the project, which took more than 250 hours of intensive design and testing, is capable of performing 19 different arithmetic and logic operations and has been validated with over 1.2 million test vectors. So this is a solid piece of work. It's working, he's tested it, and it stands out because it was built and verified at the transistor level, one component at a time, outside a professional chip fabrication environment. Now, I know this might sound all nerdy, thinking, what are you talking about, Toyin? I don't understand. That was all gobbledygook for me. If you think about microprocessors are made inside these large companies like Intel, Nvidia, and they have fabrication units that do this. And all these transistors are shrunk down to microscopic level, so we can't see them. The gates are tiny. What he did was model it using, like transistors which you can physically see, but he still got it all to work. He designed it, and it was driven by his desire to fully understand how computers work beneath the abstractions of software and pre-built hardware. And that's really important because many of us don't actually understand how computers do the things they do. We're so used to the software on top. So if we're using Windows and we don't understand that's on top of another program like maybe C, and that's on top of another program which is assembler, and then so forth and so forth. So he wanted to go all the way down to binary. How do computers work? And so with no formal background in chip design at the start, he immersed himself in digital logic, transistor physics, and circuit verification, carefully building each gate and subsystem from first principles and got it working. This is an amazing accomplishment, and just wanted to say this is good news and big him up. The next story is about the announcement that the next artwork that's going to take the pride of place, is that the term, pride of place or place of pride? Something like that, on the 4th plinth in Trafalgar Square, has actually been chosen. And it's this image you can see of the lady in blue by, and please, I hope I get the name right, Tachabala Self. It's the person who designed it, and it's going to occupy one of the highest profile public art spaces in the world from 2026. Now, the lady in blue pays homage to a young metropolitan racialized woman inspired by a desire to bring a contemporary every woman to Trafalgar Square. It's made of bronze. The work will be painted with lapis lazuli blue, which is a rare and refined pigment that has been used since antiquity. The sculpture pays homage, like I said, to a young metropolitan racialized woman who could just be one of many Londoners today. And she's a symbol of our shared present and future ambitions. This is the statement that's coming out from the London Mayor's office. And it's basically a world where all global citizens are appreciated for their unique contributions. So you can see the image, you can see what's coming. It'd be lovely once it's up there. And we're starting to see this, right? Our representation of the unique diversity of London, including people of African heritage in public spaces. And it's wonderful to know that even though I'm not part of that group anymore, that they're still going away, doing the right thing in these spaces. I still think there's more work to be done on changing the names of streets and buildings, but it's a start. Interesting. This week, or this edition of the program, we talked a lot about Congo. We've spoken about Lumumba. We also spoke about what happened at the tournament, the African League of Nations tournament. But one person who we haven't spoken about, who captured the imagination of all the people, I think I mentioned him, but I didn't offer a slide about him, was the 53-year-old Congolese man named Michael Kuka Molopelinga. I think that's how I pronounce his name. And whenever the Democratic Republic of Congo were playing, he would stand motionless on this makeshift plinth in the stands throughout the match with his right hand raised. And he wouldn't move. And it was a tribute to Lumumba. He wore the colors of the Congolese flag, red, yellow, and sky blue, in various different combinations. And he mimics the statue of Patrice Lumumba. We've spoken about him, the first prime minister after Congo won independence from Belgium. And many were impressed by his dignity, his discipline, as he held the post for 90 minutes at a time, while all the fans around him were roaring and his fortunes, the teams rose and fell on the pitch. It was an amazing contribution to the tournament. People really remembered that. And yeah, we kind of remember that. And I just thought it's nice just to kind of like share his name. I didn't have his name, and it's just nice to share that. In fact, yeah, I'll leave that there. Okay, this was another good story. Talking about public spaces. Our sister Claudine Eccleton, you can see in the bottom below in colour, she's a researcher who uncovered the identity of the woman in the picture above, who was for many years anonymous in this historical photograph. And she's actually now given her name, and she found out her name was Margaret Sullivan. And this revelation has filled her with joy. Now, our sister Claudine is founder of an arts project called Playing the Race Card. And it took her a lot of effort to identify the person sending the flowers in the 20th century postcard. She saw the image for the first time on social media in 2013 and thought, how come there's no name? She thought that seemed a bit lazy. She said that, this is a picture that's a century old. How come we don't have a name? Has no one bothered to name her? It's just like a woman there sending flowers. So what she did was that she enlisted the help of others to identify her. And, after some time, she found out who she was, and her name was Margaret Sullivan. And she said it was amazing. It filled me with joy that there was an image that was this well known, it was out there, and now we had a name for her. Now, our sister had moved to East Sussex, St. Leonard's on Sea. This is in Hastings here. And, she was disappointed that the stories of working women or for working class people seemed to be unimportant. She's also recognized that her genealogy and her own, of Margaret Sullivan and her own genealogy can only go back so far. They have no idea exactly where they're from, obviously other than Africa. According to our sister, she says that the record found that Sullivan joined the ancestors in 1919. But what she feels about this and having a name to her and going through the records, she says that, look, I'm one of the so-called Windrush generation. And there's this whole thing about us coming in the late 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. But this here is proof that people who look like me worked and contributed and lived in this space. So, I think this is a really positive story. She's actually done that work. And just a reminder, we don't have to just put up with anonymous. Here is a face back in the past. She's named it. She's done that work, and big her up. Another person who actually been bigged up, and again, these are important, kind of like achievements be acknowledged. Nurse Priti Manyima, I think that's how you say it, Manyima, who started her NHS career as a hospital cleaner, has joined an elite group of nurses after being awarded a title given by the Queen's Institute of Community Nursing. Now, she took a job mopping and sweeping the wards at Glenfields Hospital when she first moved to the UK in 2002. She's now 61 years of age. And this award, which is given to people who have demonstrated a commitment to community nursing over several years, has really kind of like sweetened her. And she said that the sky is the limit if you follow your dreams. And to give you some of her backstory, she first moved to the UK 24 years ago from Zimbabwe, and that's where she worked as a primary school teacher. But when she came to the UK, she qualified as a nurse in 2012, and the following year started as a community nurse at the Leicestershire Partnership NHS Trust. She went on to specialise in end-of-life care due to the poor experience her mother had received. And like I said, she was made a Queen's nurse in 2025, having applied to be part of the group. And again, we've spoken about women in this particular case, this particular week, who have had really bad experiences. In this particular case, her mother had really bad experience with end-of-life care. And they've gone in and decided to make sure no one else goes through that. And it's nice to see that she's been recognised and awarded for this. And, it's not always the famous names that we need to come shout about. Sometimes we just need to remember that all of us can make important contributions that actually last and stand the test of time. So yeah, big yourself up, Nurse Priti Manyima. And talking about bigging someone else up, Lambeth Council is naming a reading room in honour of the life of the award-winning author Alex Wheatle, otherwise known as the Brixton Bard. And I think it's this week, Wednesday, they're hosting a celebration alongside his family to mark 1 year since his sad passing. Now, the new Alex Wheatle reading room is going to be at Brixton Library in Winter Square, which is a place he visited quite regularly. And he's going to be launched with a special event to celebrate his life. And it's been held in partnership with a group called Stepping Into Stories Kids Literature Festival. Now, this is, kind of like a great testament, based on the fact that many of his books are based on his life in Brixton as a teenager and his time in social care services. He was an amazing individual, being recognized for so many of his contributions and inspiring so many within our community. Not shying away from talking about the challenges faced by being in care, being in prison, or someone as a member of the Windrush generation. Sadly, those of you who remember, he passed away aged 62 last year from a battle with prostate cancer. But for those of you who want to know more about him, his life was covered in a self-titled episode in the Small Axe TV series. And it's like, this is a really good thing. It's really important. I big up all those people in the council and the library who have decided to do this, because we are stakeholders in this place. Our blood has been spilled. And even though there were those in parties like the Conservatives and like Reform that would like to erase, our existence and our contributions, this country was built on our blood. It was built on our sweat and our tears and those of our ancestors. And I'm thankful. And again, just like the plinth, this is another good news story. And I think the last story for this week is a bit late, but nevertheless a positive and welcome award to the late Fela Kuti. Now, he has already long been crowned by his fans, myself included, as the king of Afrobeat. But he's now going to posthumously receive a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Grammys, which is almost 3 decades after his passing at the age of 58. It couldn't have come soon enough. Now, his son, Toyin Kuti, has said that Fela has been in the hearts of the people for such a long time. Now the Grammys have acknowledged it, and it's a double victory. It's bringing balance to a Fela story, and I kind of agree. Even his friend, longtime friend and manager, Ricky Stein, said, look, this is better late than never. Africa hasn't in the past rated very highly in their interests. I think that's changing quite a bit of late. And he's talking about the Grammys, of course. We know this. The Oscars were the same. Oscars, what was the campaign called? Oscars So White. The Grammys had been the same. Africa doesn't really exist. But what we're seeing is that following the global success of Afrobeats, which is a genre inspired by Fela, the Grammy has introduced a category of Best African Performance, and this started in 2024. Now, this particular year, Burna Boy, who's an artist who comes from a nation called Nigeria, has also had a nomination in the Best Global Music Album category. So there is some movement on these kind of things. But Fela Kuti will be the first African to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award, even though it's posthumously. And it would be nice if he received it while he was with us. And what's important for me, and the reason why this sweet me so, and why I'm happy to close with this story, was that Fela Anikulapo Kuti, I could never say the surname properly. In fact, it was Fela Anikulapo Ransom Kuti, but he scratched out the ransom to sever the European connection. Was not simply a musician, but he was also a political agitator, a cultural theorist, and the undisputed architect of Afrobeat, which is distinct from, but ultimately led to the modern sound of Afrobeats. So what Fela did was clearly to uplift African people across the world. And even though Afrobeats is a watered down version of it, it still has roots in his legacy. I have fond memories every Sunday of my father playing Fela around the house, and that's how I was introduced to Fela as a young boy. So my Sunday rituals of watching Columbo, listening to Fela, and maybe enjoying a Star Trek episode still live on me. And they shape my political view and worldview. And you'll see this me wearing the Spock top. I can't shake those things. I don't want to. Okay, I still had to stay optimistic in a time of the world which is so toxic and violent and in many ways depressing. So big up Fela. And that's it. That's the last story. I guess I'm going to say thank you to all of you who made it this far. I think we just made it in under 2 hours. Yeah. And as ever, I'm going to thank Sister Angie, Brother Colin, Sister Emma for their research, and others who sent stories to us. Our next broadcast will be on Sunday, the 15th of February at 6 p.m. So, you're there. I don't know what else to say. join a collective, Pan-African organization. If you're, don't anguish, do something about it. Even if it's empowering yourself, support our artists, and support our journalists who are doing their best writing at this time, despite lacking support in the mainstream media. I'm talking about the Melissa Sigodos and the Dean Whites, the Sinea Fleary. Now we're seeing what's happened to Don Lemon, African-American journalist who's now been arrested and charged. We have to keep this work going on. I'm going to leave it now. I think I've lost Sister Oleander right now, so my apologies. But I'm going to say, as ever, may the ancestors continue to kind of protect us. I think I'm here.
You haven't lost me. I'm here. There was just one query someone had, but I didn't want to disturb your flow. And it's from Shamin8249 saying, I'm late to the program. Is there an update on Child Q?
Thank you. We haven't, thank you. And no, you arrived when you arrived. There's no such thing as late, so give thanks. No, we haven't heard anything on Child Q. It's quite tricky because of her age, even though she now, is likely, I've got to be mindful what's, no, because of her age, the safeguarding rules means that we have to keep her anonymous. And so we can't share any personal details. The council has made changes and police policy in Hackney has changed, seeing a massive, if I'm honest with you, a massive reduction in what they call MTIB, which is, oh God, I've forgotten the acronym is, intimate body searches. So they used to have this this policy where they would search young children without, grown-ups around and responsible adults. That's actually changed now. They have to get, like authorization before they can do so. But I've actually, I won't say given up on that practice, but they have made significant changes, certainly in the Borough of Hackney. And I keep my eye on that particular topic. But I can't speak specifically for Child Q because we weren't really ever allowed to know their identification. And even though the people I know who Child Q is, I don't, as a habit, try to violate that confidentiality. But what I can say is that her experience has led to an improvement. Sorry, it had to be that way for other children in the borough. And I hope it stays that way, that they don't regress back, because of course this particular government, this Labour government, is very draconian when it comes to policing. But thank you for the question.
Okay, yeah, no more questions, just some praise for a great show, as usual. Yeah, that's about it, really. And just to say thank you, everybody, for joining us again. We really do appreciate your support. And as Brother Toyin says, please do share with others that you think might find it useful, as well as, do please subscribe and like the video. So thank you, and have a lovely 2 weeks ahead.
Yes, thank you. And please take care, whatever you do. These are troubling times we're moving into, so be safe and make sure you've got your folk around you to watch your back. And as ever, may the ancestors continue to guide and protect us. Ashe.
Ashe.